What's up, geeks and gamers? It's Odin coming back with a box office breakdown video for this past weekend, which saw the release of the brand new film Bullet Train, starring Brad Pitt, a film that I was personally a very big fan of. Definitely recommend going to see it in theaters, as it is a darn good time. Coming in a little bit above the projections, though not by all that much, both domestically and internationally. We also saw the second weekend numbers for DC League of Super Pets, and even though it's not the worst drop-off that I've seen, because of how little it made in its opening weekend, right now the projections are that the film will end up losing money for Warner Brothers, which really isn't all that different than what Warner Brothers has seen in the past, especially over the last couple of years, where almost every single one of their films, it seems, has lost money, or at the very least has made only a little bit of money, or they've had maybe one or two exceptions to that rule. We also have some more numbers coming in for the films Nope, Thor, Love and Thunder, Minions, The Rise of Gru, and Top Gun Maverick, which continues to be in the top 10, coming in this week at the number 6 mark as well. So let's go ahead and dive into these numbers. Bullet Train, the big news story of this weekend for box office is because it's a brand new film, making $30.1 million, just a little bit higher than the $30 million that was projected for this movie. DC League of Super Pets came in the number 2 spot with a 51% drop from the previous week, bringing in $11.2 million, now a total domestic of $45 million, but this film, as you can just tell from those numbers, not really doing the typical animated film type numbers that you would see from films like Minions, The Rise of Gru, for instance. And this is definitely playing a little bit more so, and obviously even a lot worse than films like Lightyear, which ended up being box office bombs. Though the one thing that this has going for it that Lightyear did not have going for it is that this budget is much smaller than the massive bloated budget for the film Lightyear. Coming in at the number 3 spot is the film Nope from Jordan Peele, making another $8.5 million in its third week of release. Starting to bleed screens here, as you can see, losing over almost 800 screens, dropping another 54%. This is a movie that's going to rely very heavily on the international market to determine whether or not it makes its money back at this point, because the film is still tracking right in between his other films, his previous 2 films. And so since we don't have any international numbers being reported yet for this movie, or at least they're not coming in from the numbers or even on Box Office Mojo, at least at the time of recording this video, it's going to be interesting to see, to say the very least, about whether this film's able to make its money back. But obviously, I think that once those international numbers come in, because it doesn't have to make that much money to make its money back and to break even, I think it's still very much possible and a very likely scenario. Thor: Love and Thunder is just on the cusp of $700 million worldwide, which some people might say, yeah, $700 million, see, we told you it was doing well. Yeah, but if you actually look at the net gains from it, it's still really low in comparison to many of the other, in fact, most of the other MCU films that have ever been released. And when you compare this film's worldwide totals to previous Thor films, you're starting to realize, yeah, the movie really isn't performing all that well, especially when you do something very important, which a lot of these articles and a lot of these mainstream media types aren't doing, which is adjust the numbers for inflation, because that's really the only fair way to make that type of comparison between them. But I digress. Rounding up the top 5 is Minions, The Rise of Gru, making another $7.1 million after 6 weeks of release. This film is continuing to see very strong holds from week to week and is still out at over 3,000 screens. The last film I'll talk about on this chart at the very least is the 2,700 screen film Top Gun Maverick. 11 weeks of release. 11 weeks of release. It's been out for 77 days, and it is still making $7 million, continuing to do pretty well over internationally as well. And it's very likely that this film will be able to pass up The Last Jedi by next weekend. I said it was either going to be this weekend or next weekend, looking like it'll be closer to next weekend, but it's looking like that will be the case, and the chance of it hitting $1.4 million in total is still very much on the table. Looking at the worldwide numbers for these films, we have Bullet Train coming in at $62.5 million, so about $2.5 million higher than the projections. They had projected the film to make around $30 million domestically, around $30 million internationally, clearly doing a little bit better here. And even though, of course, the critics are going to have their way with this movie as far as tearing it apart, I can say that as a general audience member and as just a fan of this movie, it is just a darn good time, and everyone in the theater that I was in, even though it wasn't very large, I knew that this film wasn't going to be a big money getter its opening weekend. I do think that because everyone in the theater was enjoying it, was having fun, was laughing at it, the characters in this film, I think, are very well done. And I think that this film knows exactly what it is. It doesn't take itself too seriously. It knows that its concept is ridiculous, and it plays on that to a great level. I think that this film is going to get a lot of really positive word of mouth, and I think that that could potentially see this film have a very small drop from this week to next week, and I think that those types of drops might continue. And so my hope is, of course, that this film is able to continue and to push it out to be able to make some money, because I think this film is worth it. It's a film that I definitely would like to buy on 4K Steelbook when it eventually comes out, because it's just that much fun. And there haven't been a lot of films that have been a lot of fun recently, other than Top Gun Maverick. And that was a different kind of fun. That was a different kind of movie-going experience than Bullet Train. There really hasn't been a lot to talk about. So Bullet Train right now is definitely one of my favorite films of the year, and it's purely because of the enjoyability factor of the movie. And so I would highly recommend it if you have not seen the film and you've been kind of waiting to hear people's thoughts on it. I think it's a darn good time. DC League of Super Pets have not seen this film, really have no desire to see it. Trailer never really brought any interest to me whatsoever. Right now, that's looking at around an $83.4 million worldwide total. This film needs to make a lot more than that in order to break even. And so the chances of that happening aren't very likely at this point in time. Not going to be a massive money loser, though, because of the budget not being as high as, again, films like Lightyear, but still not all that great. Regardless, the film Nope still waiting on some international numbers to save it with a $97.9 million domestic. As you can see, it is not underperforming its projections. It was closer to the middle of the pack early on, and so it seems that it's starting to drop up a little bit in comparison to the actual projections that they had for this movie. So not performing, at the higher end, but also it's not underperforming by any means, at least domestically. Again, those international numbers are going to be key to the success or failure of this movie as far as the actual standards are concerned for actual making profit or not. Thor: Love and Thunder, again, on the cusp of $700 million, but hasn't quite reached that yet. And when you especially break down these international domestic numbers, individually, to be only around $300 million is just really abysmal. You look at the chart right here. This is where it was projected to be, and this film is well below that. So it's at $316 million domestically. It should be somewhere between $342 and $513 million, according to the charting over at the numbers. So clearly not doing all that well. When you compare this film even to some of the other films in the franchise, for instance, like the last film, Thor Ragnarok, or even Thor: The Dark World, you're also starting to see a bit of a trend. For one, Thor Ragnarok made $869.4 million. Now, some people try to point out saying, yeah, well, it had other countries that it was able to open in, and so therefore that gives it an advantage. The problem is that when you still do comparisons in like-for-like markets and other things like that, you start to realize that Love and Thunder really isn't doing all that much better, or at least not as much better as it should be doing in a franchise that was moving in a forward direction and it now has taken a giant step back. So far back, in fact, that when you look at the film Thor: The Dark World from 2013, and again, this is why adjusting for inflation is so important. Thor: The Dark World ended its run at $727 million worldwide. This film has barely made it to $700 million. Now, obviously, there's still some time for this film to be able to catch that. But the fact that this film is going to be in the discussion as far as the Thor franchise total box office with a film like Thor: The Dark World, I think should spell a lot of concerns and worries with the people over at Disney and people over at Marvel. Of course, all one and the same in many respects. Minions, $757 million, has a good chance of making it to over $800 million worldwide, which is pretty impressive to say the least. Top Gun Maverick at $1.352 billion. And as you can see, in comparison to Star Wars: The Last Jedi, which is a film of comparison that we'd like to bring up, not only did The Last Jedi cost about $100 million more, you're also starting to see that this film at $1.35 billion, not too far off from the $1.361 billion, and that is adjusted for inflation as well. And it's going to easily be able to overtake that by next weekend. And the question really becomes just how much more money can Top Gun Maverick end up making? And I think $1.4 billion is at least in the cards for the film. Looking at some box office tracking, because we like to do some tracking over here. This is my website, ombreviews.com, if you want to follow charting for yourselves. As you can see, with the second weekend numbers in for DC League of Super Pets, I'm projecting the film to make somewhere between $119 and $166 million, so an average around $142.9 million, based off of a budget of $90 million, so still a pretty high budget, but again, not nearly as high as Lightyear's $200 million budget. Right now, I am projecting that DC League of Super Pets is going to lose somewhere between $63 and $34 million. So, yeah, looking like it'll be a $50 million loss for Warner Brothers, which, again, not all that surprising, as Warner Brothers should be used to losing money, at least when it comes to their box office runs, because, yeah, they've had a rung of bad luck for a very long time, and it seems that they might be moving in the right direction with some new leadership, with the Discovery merger, for instance, and some of the people attached to that merger, getting rid of films like Batgirl, which had been fully filmed. The fact that they even did that and didn't even want to put it on a platform just to be able to maybe get some money or justify its existence in some way kind of tells me that they might be moving in the right direction, but we'll have to, of course, wait and see exactly what kind of numbers we start seeing from the HBO Max streaming service, and also what they start to release in theaters, and whether or not they're able to actually start making films that make their money back, because one of the biggest problems with Warner Brothers films is their bloated budgets. But again, looking like it's going to be a box office loss for that film. New film Bullet Train, $62.5 million, currently puts it around $97 million in the red. So the chances of this film being a again, financial loss right now, as of today, is looking like it is a likely scenario. But as I said, I think that word of mouth might be able to push this film, and even be able to push this film past that point to actually start to make some money back. Similar to what we saw with Elvis. Elvis kind of came out of nowhere. It was projected to lose a lot of money. I was wrong on that, and we'll go ahead and look at the chart yourself and see that right now it has made more than half of what it made in the first 2 weeks of the release, which is what my numbers are typically based off of. It's already made $23.2 million in actual profit. So not that profitable of a movie in comparison to how much it spent on the movie, but the fact that it's at $251 million and it was projected to lose somewhere around $30 million or so is, again, a good sign for that movie. And I think that if good word of mouth is able to at least be able to hang around Bullet Train, as I hope that it does, you could see something similar as far as low drop-offs week to week. And again, would love to see that happen. Also, a new film that came out this week, and you didn't hear me talk about it in the early goings because it didn't even break into those top numbers, because it only made $5.2 million, and that's Easter Sunday. That's right, a film about Easter coming out in August. Yes, that makes a lot of sense. Didn't cost all that much money, and so theoretically, I guess making its money back is still possible, but starting off at $5.2 million, not a very strong place, not a very strong place at all. DC Leo Super Pets, as you can see right now, is $84 million in the red. Again, I'm projecting it to be probably around $50 million in the red when all is said and done. The film Nope still sitting around $43.2 million in the red, but also it has not gotten any international cash, and so I think that once that happens, it'll get to its $170 million or so break-even point. Where the Crawdad Sing has been able to broke even last weekend. It's almost doubled what it made in the first 2 weeks of release. Right now, around $10 million in actual net gain profit. Paw as a Fury, The Legend of Hank, is already being, let's just say it's being stripped from theaters because no one's going to actually go see it. $56 million in the red. It's only at $18 million worldwide. I would be amazed if this film is still is still over 1,000 screens by even the end of next weekend. Thor: Love and Thunder, it has made some profit. It has broken even, getting $44.3 million in net gain profits. But as I mentioned, in comparison to some of the other films, it does still show a pretty dire sign of the future. Again, if they start to see, again, this is a big if they continue to see this law of diminishing returns, right? So you had Doctor Strange, Multiverse of Madness, massive opening, much thanks to, let's just be honest, Spider-Man No Way Home, much thanks to that film, then had massive drop-offs after that point, was still able to get to over $950 million. This film right here, you ask the question, where did the $250 million or so dollars, or the people who spent that money, go between Doctor Strange and this film? And I think that is definitely something that they're going to have to start to recognize and realize as they try to figure things going forward, especially when you look at the fact that Minions: The Rise of Gru is beating this movie. And when you have an MCU film losing to a Minions film, and this is not to degrade the Minions films by any means, most people would say, yeah, there's something not quite right about what's going on there. The last thing I want to talk about is Jurassic World Dominion, because some people said, hey, just wait for Japan to come out. They're going to come out in droves to go see it. And even though it has made around $20 million in Japan, the film is still at $960 million. I still don't think $1 billion is possible for this movie. However, even though it might not make $1 billion, and likely won't, $328 million in net gain profit, still a darn good sign. Of course, nothing compared, though, to the $500+ million that has been made in net gain profits from Top Gun Maverick at $1.3 billion. But those are the numbers as they stand. What are y'all's thoughts about this? Have you seen Bullet Train? Did you think it was good? Did you think it was fun, exciting? Let me know in the comment section down below. And also check out my website, ombreviewers.com, and my YouTube channel at OMB Reviews as well. Make sure that you smash that like button, lob that fire button on Odyssey. You guys are all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, God bless.